Wake up, everyone. It's time for a call to action. Welcome to Call to Action today, where there are no sacred cows, with your host, Steve Noble, just an ordinary man who believes in an extraordinary God, and he's calling you out every week to live the Christian life in your home, your work, and even in politics. Call Steve now at 866-34-TRUTH or check him out online at c2atoday.org. And now, with some much-needed cough medicine for the church, here's your host, Steve Noble.
Well, I can only imagine what it was like on Monday after Resurrection Sunday, where, hey, it was time to get to work. And it was funny when Jesus is ascending into heaven and the angel's like, hey, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? As they all stand up there looking into the sky, watching him ascend. And even then, some doubted. And it's that's just the fallen frailness of the human race. But it is Monday after Resurrection Sunday, and I hope you had an awesome weekend and an awesome Easter celebration and Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday. And certainly was, I would say it was the best Easter celebration in the Noble family history. In my family, and immediate family, Gina and I have been married for over 25 years now. I'll share that in a second. But also want to find out how our good friend David Fischer at Landmark Capital. David, how are you, buddy? Welcome to the show. Happy Resurrection Day. And how was Easter for your family?
He is risen. Easter for my family was great. I got to have my grandson with me this year. That made it extra special. He's just turned 9, and at that age they say all kinds of crazy things. But the influence that we get to impact in his life is just so wonderful. And so family was around the dinner table. Obviously it's Sunday afternoon after church, and the obvious is all the funny things that happen during the week we get to talk about. And so, it was just a pretty typical, normal Sunday, Easter Sunday. What made it so special at your home?
Well, we were at the earlier service on Sunday at our church. We go to the Summit Church here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Pastor J.D. Greer, which he's kind of a rock star in the Southern Baptist world. But setting that aside, at the end of the service, he asked people if they want, make a profession of faith to follow Christ. And also he did a real strong push for baptism. Our youngest daughter, Caroline, who's 13, she accepted Christ as her Savior. We definitely believed that several years ago, and has struggled with baptism and being nervous and kind of embarrassed. And she didn't want to do it because there was pressure. She wanted to make sure it was the right time. And so we were talking to her at the end of the service, and she was struggling a little bit. And I said, honey, this isn't between you and your parents. This is between you and the Lord. And if you feel like God wants you to do this is something he's called us to do in Scripture, then you need to be faithful to that. And she says, okay, let's go. So,
oh, wow.
So we went down. It was right at the
awesome.
end. It was awesome. And it gets even better right at the end of the first service. So we went back, and they take you to these tents. At our church, they have everything you need. There are no excuses. They remove all the barriers because they have shorts and shirts and clean underwear. I mean, everything you could possibly need to kind of on the spot do a baptism. So then they had us go at the beginning of the next service, which is a really full service. And a friend of mine, Chuck Reed, who's a pastor there, just a great brother of mine, a great friend, and he allowed me the incredible honor of baptizing my own daughter. So that was that was a huge blessing. I baptized one of our other kids. I baptized Clay when he was a little rascal. Today he's 6'5". I don't think I could pull it off, but it was awesome to be able to see her want to go forward in public profession of her faith at a baptism, but to be able to do it myself was just one of the highlights of my life, I got to tell you.
That is such a great story. I'm so happy for you, Steve. That's really, really cool and awesome.
Yeah, it's a great praise. So we just thank the Lord for that. Well, we're talking to David Fischer. It's a Full Money Monday, and I oftentimes remind everybody, why do we talk about finances and stuff on the Mondays that are not the first Monday of the month? We do a little update in the last segment of the show, but 16 of the 38 parables were concerned with how to handle money and possessions. In the Gospels, 1 out of 10 verses deal directly with the subject of money. The Bible offers 500 verses on prayer, less than 500 verses on faith directly, but more than 2,000 verses on money and possessions. So if Jesus and the Word are talking about money and possessions and these issues, then why should we not? There, of course, is no excuse. So David Fischer with Landmark Capital is our great friend that is a great supporter of this show and helps make it possible for us to even be talking together on the air, but brings great wisdom and knowledge from all his work running Landmark Capital. LandmarkGold.com is their website, as always. And David, I know we've got a full plate today. So let's talk about kind of all the markets. The market's tanking again today. But let's look at kind of a year-to-date, get a framework. We're at the beginning of April. We're starting the second quarter. And let's look at all the markets. So what's been happening on the financial front since January 1?
Well, on the paper index, Steve, the Dow's down year-to-date 4.73%. The S&P 500 also down 3.5%. NASDAQ is down just slightly, 0.35%. Silver is down 1.8% in the metals here. But gold is the one that's up this year at 2.8%.
Yeah, so we've been kind of on this downward slide and jerking back and forth and up and down. Right now, the market ending up down at about almost 459 points. And just kind of wild, all the indexes are again this week off to a bad start. We finished kind of weak last week at the end of last week. Is this kind of all, the trade? Now, China came out today. I heard that the name specific American products that they were slapping a tariff on. So we've got that trade war with China. Looks like that's starting to get stoked up. We have the Amazon going on. Facebook's getting beat up. So what do we make of all this, David?
Well, there's a correlation between the tech stocks are off today, and that is happening because of Amazon and Facebook. But, it's across the board. It's not just, usually when one company is in trouble like Facebook, it doesn't affect all the tech stocks, but it's clearly doing that. When we look at what's going on, the broader market, all the indexes are down. That is not just because Amazon and Facebook is down. Is it because China's now retaliating with 128 different products that they're putting tariffs on? It could be a segment of that. I think the bigger picture is, though, Steve, when we look at what I've been saying that would happen in the beginning of this year, we're going to have a choppy market. And it's not going to make the gains that we saw last year. It was just unprecedented last year. But the driver of the sell-off of the market is going to be completely done and influenced by what the Fed is doing, them unraveling their balance sheet, because they said over 5 years ago with their test model that they wouldn't be able to unravel or sell treasuries without it having this huge volatility and drive the markets down, because it creates who's the buyer for the treasuries. So that's the problem that we're having. And if you look on this, at the end of each month, starting in January or the first day of trading the next month, there is definitely a trend here. At the end of January, early February, the Dow was off 666 points. The next day was off 1175. Big drop those consecutive days. End of February week, 1171, and this sell-off Thursday, 612, and now almost 460 points today. So it's a correlation there.
Yeah, that 1-2 punch coming. We're going to talk some more about that. We're going to talk about the Fed, which I'm going to rename here on the air. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Steve Noble, Call to Action Radio. Great to be with you post-Resurrection Day. Praise the Lord. He is risen. He is risen indeed. I hope you had a great weekend with your family and friends. We certainly did at the Noble House. And we're talking to our good friend David Fischer, of course, Landmark Capital, and just a great brother in the Lord, a great source of wisdom and knowledge for all these financial issues and banking issues, the Fed, what's going on, not only here in America, but across the pond and things going on internationally. It still takes you a while to fly around the globe, but it doesn't take very long at all for things around the globe to affect every other part of the globe. So we have to keep an eye on things, not just American, but things around the world. And David has been a great blessing to this show for a couple of years, helping us do that, and has been a great servant of many of our listeners. And if you want to get more information for yourself, landmarkgold.com is their website, as always, landmarkgold.com. And also today, we usually have such a full slate, and we do have a lot to talk about. But I want to give you an opportunity if you'd like to call in, especially if you have a question about precious metals, the use of that in the market, or any questions you have. If they're skeptical, whatever you feel led to ask, just give us a call, especially about precious metals, but anything else that we're talking about is on the table. But we'd love to get your question and share it with David and get you an answer. 866-34-TRUTH is our phone number, 866-34-TRUTH. Any questions that you have, and I'll work you into the show. And I've got several questions that came in off of Facebook and to my friends on Facebook Live right now. If you guys have any questions, just type them right there in the screen, and I'll share those with David. 866-348-7884. or 866-34-TRUTH. And we were talking about all this craziness with the market and down a lot the end of last week and then getting hammered again today. I did that the last couple of monthly turnovers, January to March. And we talked about Amazon and Facebook, but a lot about what the Fed's doing with unwinding its balance sheet and dumping some of its assets. But let's talk about the Fed a little more specifically, which I'm now going to rename the Corleone family. If you don't know what the Corleone family is, that's the Godfather. It's the Godfather family from movie fame, because it seems like they had their fingers in everything, and I think the Fed does too. So let's talk about the Fed in general. And by the way, again, if you have any questions for David, 866-34-TRUTH. But let's talk about the Fed. What are they up to now, David?
So they have to unravel the balance sheet. They're doing several things. Number one, they're unraveling the balance sheet. Number two, they are on an interest rate hike environment. So those two things cause havoc to the market, and the bigger of the two in the short term for the next 2 to 3 years is going to be them selling assets, unraveling the balance sheet. The balance sheet is just simply put what they bought over the last 3 or 4 years after the downturn of 2007. So they bought treasuries and they bought mortgage-backed securities. To put it into perspective, Steve, they had about $880 billion in 2007 before the downturn on their balance sheet. Most of that was securities and treasuries. And then they bought a total of $4.5 trillion is where they expanded their balance sheet. The majority of that is between two assets, mortgage-backed securities, those homes that went under, that defaulted, the mortgage, the security on that. The Feds bought that bad paper. $1.3 trillion approximately, or $1.7 trillion, and they hold about $2.6 trillion in U.S. Treasuries. So they've been designing a plan starting in about 2011, 12-ish, where they tried to unravel the balance sheet, sell these assets,
unload,
and every model was cause market turmoil.
Yeah, and why does the market react to this? So every time we say the Fed is unwinding its balance sheet, that means they're dumping these assets. They're trying to sell these assets off, and of course, there's not as many people countries interested in buying American assets because the trouble we're in debt-wise. But why does the market react the way it does?
Well, they started in September in the market with $20 billion a month, and it didn't have any turmoil in it because the market was so raging. Then they escalated in January to $30 billion. So then it started the market turmoil because the Fed liquidates a treasury at the end of the month when treasuries mature, and also on the 15th, but they hardly do anything on the 15th of the month. So there's uncertainty that it creates all this massive amount of treasuries. Who's going to buy the treasuries? Well, the Fed goes and sells it back to the Treasury directly because they have what you call repurchase agreements from the Treasury. But any investors sell it to the open market on Wall Street. So there's been a gluttony of treasuries from people selling it, like the Fed, which says to the world, if the largest bank in the world, the central bank being the Fed, which represents the U.S. dollar, if they're selling U.S. dollars, right, shouldn't I be? It creates this whole, why are they doing this? Well, the reason they're doing it is because if they don't sell and we get, as rates go up, or what you call yields go up, it actually causes the Treasury to go down, so they lose money. So part of the reason they're selling treasuries so they don't lose money, and the other reason is, the bigger reason is because they have to get their leverage books down. They're leveraged 77 to 1. They were only leveraged at 7 to 1 before they bought all these assets, treasuries. So they got to get back to normal, because they can't handle the next crisis when it comes around to be able to print more money or expand it through quantitative easing. I know that's a bad term on Wall Street, but that's what they did. And so they have to get back to normalcy. That's why they're unraveling it, and it creates who's going to buy this treasury. That's why I said in January, expect that we're going to have market turmoil during this year. Now, every quarter, they're going to increase this another $10 billion until they get up to $50 billion. That'll be by the fourth quarter of the next year. It's every month $50 billion. So until the markets factor all this turmoil, this selling of the Fed, we're going to have market turmoil and volatility at the end of the month.
Now, how do you then factor in our bloated and ever-expanding federal deficit? Because right now, their debt's at 21 trillion and climbing. It's not slowing down, and Donald Trump's definitely not standing in front of that train either. How does that factor into what's happening?
Well, I don't know if it necessarily factors into the market so much as it factors into the bigger picture, who's going to pay for all this debt. On top of that, Congress just passed the $1.3 trillion omnibus spending bill, which adds more spending. And, we're going to have other bills that we're going to pass this year as a country. So we're on a massive spending spree. We're on a massive creating of treasuries. There's a gluttony of treasuries out there like never before. And so just the environment does affect the market, but I don't think debt right now is affecting, the downturn of the markets. Debt causes gold to go up. So there's a correlation there from our government debt, and that's what started the bull market in gold in 2001, was our government started going massively in the debt post 9/11. But right now, I don't think the debt is weighing down on the market. I think it's more the Fed aspects of it.
Yeah, the Corleone family activities. We're gonna on the other side of the break, we're gonna start working through some of these questions that are coming in. But if you want to ask David a question, especially about precious metals and the use of that in terms of an investment strategy, 866-348-7884. We're going to open up the phones here for the rest of the show. We've got some other things to talk about, but if you want to get a question in there, we'd love to add you to the program. 866-348-7884 or 866-34-TRUTH. I'm going to set up this first question, David, then we'll hit the break, and then we'll get an answer when we come back. This is from Pat on Facebook. What if someone wanted to invest in real gold or silver pieces or literal ownership of these metals instead of what he calls the typical marketing pushes for people to invest in things like gold and silver stocks or certified, quote-unquote, certified gold bonds, derivatives, stake funds, any of these other paper or conceptual investment assets. So Pat wanting to know about actually buying gold and taking possession of that versus kind of all these other gold and silver options out there. We're going to take that one and your calls as well. 866-34-TRUTH when we come back. Back at Steve Noble. Money Monday, we do this full show on financial issues, stock markets, gold, silver, what's going on with China, international things, domestic things, the Fed, which I like to call the Corleone family, which is a throwback to the Godfather series. And we're doing all of that. We do a full Money Monday, the first Monday of the month. So today being April 2nd, it's the very first Monday of the month. So we do a full show with our friend David Fischer from Landmark Capital. Their website is always landmarkgold.com. And you can get information there. Their white papers are there. It's just a great way to connect and a great partner here on the show, a great friend in the Lord, and a great source of wisdom and education for all of us. Landmarkgold.com is their website. But talking through a lot of different issues today, and I set up one question before the break. And by the way, if you have any questions specifically about gold and silver, and maybe several years ago, before when David and I first started talking, I was a major skeptic about precious metals, but that was just me making a decision and having an opinion based on some of the sources that I saw who advertised for it. I'm listening to Glenn Beck every day sell me gun safes and food storage and gold. So when I'm hearing that from Glenn Beck, I'm there going, is this just paranoia? The sky is falling, blah, 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 blah. So I really didn't give it much thought and kind of assumed a negative position. And then when we first syndicated and I got to have a conversation with David, and we spent hours talking back and forth because I had a lot of questions. My job is to serve the Lord, number one, and to serve you there in the audience, to serve you, number two. So I was a skeptic, and that helps. That's me running interference for you. And got educated. And once I understood, I said, okay, this makes perfect sense, and it makes perfect sense biblically. It makes perfect sense financially. But there are a lot of places out there that are just kind of going after your wallet. They don't really care about you. It's just another transaction, and so we have reason to be doubtful about that. But, David, we really appreciate you being on here and helping us out with these complex issues.
Well, thank you very much. We believe that education is vital in markets, and specifically also being properly educated in what type of products you should be buying in metals. So that's why we do all these things.
Amen. If you want to call in, ask any questions for David, 866-348-7884, especially in his specialty. Has a wide breadth of knowledge, but his business really focuses on gold and silver. And so any questions you have that he can be of benefit to you and a blessing to you just to help you get educated and get some information, just give us a call during the show today, 866-348-7884. 866-7884. That's 866-34-TRUTH. I was setting up a question from Pat from Facebook, and he had a question about, he wanted to interested in investing in real gold as opposed to things like gold and silver stocks and certified gold bonds and kind of all these other devices out there. So what's your advice on that and some concerns that we should probably all have?
Well, knowledge is power, and Scripture says people perish for lack of knowledge and wisdom. And Pat, thank you for your question. Buying an ETF is really not buying gold stocks, although I'm not against all these asset classes. It's still in the paper industry, paper side of the markets. So gold, is physical, silver is physical, and there's different markets in metals, in gold and silver. We have in a financial packet that we send out to our investors that talks about the different categories in precious metals, and there's a total of 6 of them. And I'm not referring to gold, silver, platinum, palladium. I'm talking about the areas specifically in those areas. And then we whittle it down or narrow it down to the 3 distinctive areas, and we go over the benefits and drawbacks of those markets, and then also the historical movements of those markets, what they've done over 3 major bull markets and how they relate to each other. So you can see numbers of performance and protection. We call this a financial blueprint. It's an interactive conversation we have. If you want to have that, Pat, you can call my company and one of my representatives can do that with you. And I believe you'll know more than 90 to 95% of the people that have already invested or thinking about investing in about a 15 to 20 minute time. So it's very educational. It's very important that you have something like this before you go into the market and make a decision, or work with a reputable company, that does educate. Unfortunately, most companies I've found out in 25 years, Pat and also Steve, most people don't educate. They have a product in their inventory, and that's what they tell you to buy. So it's not a tailor-made and focused on the client's decision and what their needs and wants are, and that's what we do here at Landmark Capital. As far as authentic, how to determine what's authentic and what is not. A quick side story: I had a person who heard us on the radio here locally in Phoenix. I'm also on radio in Phoenix here too, and looked us up, walked into my company and brought in some gold coins and wanted me to evaluate it. And he set them down on the edge of my desk there, and I looked at him, paused for a second, and I said, I hate to break the news to you, but those are not real. And he looked at me like just totally shocked. He says, how do you know so quickly without even really looking at him? I said, well, when you've been doing something this long, it sticks out. That's something that's not authentic, sticks out like a sore thumb. I go, the color's wrong. I go, and may I look at him? I picked up the coin. I said, this coin here is a rare coin. If it was real, there's only 2 in the world, and the other one's in the Smithsonian. I don't think you have this one, and I know it's not real. And I turned it over, and it said copy on the back. So, he had a really eye-opening experience, and I suggested wherever he got those, if he could go get his money back, obviously, because he thought he bought real coins. So, unfortunately, that does happen. Not very often. About like winning the lottery, not very often at all. But I've seen a few counterfeit coins in my life, and I look at it, hold it, touch it. I can get a pretty strong indication of if it's real or not within the first few seconds. But my advice is buy a graded coin. Then you don't have to worry about all that, and you don't have the experience. It's been already authenticated by a third-party grading company. But before you invest, make sure you have a plan. You wouldn't build a house without a blueprint, neither should you invest without a plan.
So when you say something's graded, that's basically like authenticating that something is a piece of art by a certain artist. There's companies out there and organizations out there that actually grade these things so it's already been validated. Is that correct?
Correct. The 2 grading companies that were started in 1986 are the industry premier. And by the way, on the side note, one of those in 1996, I was flown out by the owner, and so I had a individual tour from the owner of the grading company, something hardly any of my people in my industry ever see, the grading behind the scenes. I know all about it through and through. So, So grading of a coin verifies its authenticity. It's in a hard plastic case, so you can't change the grade or tamper with it. So that's the best way of knowing it's real.
I have thanks for that. I have another question. This is kind of a two-parter from Catherine. What's a minimum percentage that David would suggest you have in your portfolio? And then the follow-up is, and can a transfer into gold and silver be done with a 401k so there is no tax implication? That's a great question as well.
Well, this is a personal decision on what the minimum is. I have some people that put 10%. That's their minimum. Some people say, a third, a third, a third, a third, and a third. Some people say a quarter and a quarter and a quarter. It's what the minimum is going to be something that's driving your spirit. But I would have you assess it on what you believe. If you think we're going to continue to have downturn in the market and we're going to have inflation coming, then your minimum might want to be higher than normal. But I would say as just an ultra conservative norm, 10% is a industry standard, as a very low number, as being diversified into precious metals.
And again, I always kind of look at that like a teeter-totter. On one end, you've got your typical investments in the stock market, and the other end of the teeter-totter is something like precious metals, which helps you balance out, and you're not getting flipped too far either direction. Is that a decent analogy?
Yeah. So, we've talked about in the past many times having a quarter, a quarter, a quarter. If you did that prior to 2007, having 25% in cash, in real estate, in stocks, and in precious metals, here's what would have happened. When the stocks got hit 35 to 45%, precious metals rose 50% the very same year and went on a multi-year run and doubled in 2.5 years. Real estate got hit about as hard as stocks, but it took longer to recover. And cash was there in case you lost revenue from your job. So it paid to have that type of strategy going into 2007. It doesn't always pay that strategy when you're in a booming stock market like last year. Some people feel like they missed out. So that's why you got to, readjust your thinking at the environment that we're in. So we're getting ready for more inflationary markets and more markets that are downturns. So you might want to adjust a little bit more heavier in the precious metal industry.
And then what about the question about being able to transfer into gold and silver with a 401k?
Oh, we've helped lots of people do that. Sometimes there's some criteria that there is, the funds are not qualified, what you call qualified funds. In other words, maybe the person has not either been at the company long enough or they're not reached that age of 59 and a half. And there's no certain exact criteria for each 401k, but there is a line of rule of thumb that you have to be there. You have to be 59 and a half or older to be able to roll over a portion of your 401k. Although I have helped many people do this and they've not reached that age, they've been younger. So it's just how the plan was originally written. We can help the investor. I would suggest you don't go to the HR department. I would call the place which is your trustee, which is where you get your statement. It would be like Fidelity or Charles Schwab, whoever manages your actual account.
Got it. Thanks, David. We're talking to David Fischer, Landmark Capital. Their website is always landmarkgold.com. This is Steve.
'Cause you are more than I could ever dream. This world could ever see. Forever I'm discovering Jesus, you are more.
Welcome back. It's Steve Noble, Call to Action Radio. Great to be with you. And Call to Action Radio and the intro that you hear, this will be the last week for that. No, we're not going off the air, just doing a little name change, a little rebranding stuff there. It'll just, starting probably next Monday, you'll hear it start off as the Steve Noble Show. It's not the same exact thing. It's just an easier marketing to say the Steve Noble Show, then Call to Action Radio, and it's CALLED, then the number 2, da-da-da-da-da. And really, it's a little more personable that way. That's kind of the industry norm. So you'll hear that switch here in the next 7 days. We're down to the little nitty-gritty details of getting everything switched over. So it'll be pretty seamless on the air. You'll hear a new introduction. It'll sound slightly different. But same old show, same old me, and God's on the throne, so it doesn't really matter what we do. He's going to take care of it anyway because he's always faithful. Today, Money Monday, which we do the full show the first Monday of each month, and today being April 2nd, with our good friend David Fischer from Landmark Capital. And by the way, a great a brother in the Lord, a friend of mine, but a great source of information and wisdom and knowledge and expertise, which is why we bring him on, and he's been helping us out for the last couple of years in understanding these complex issues. But if you want to find out more for yourself, as David was talking about earlier, really the number one thing is education, getting yourself educated so that you can be a good steward of whatever amount of resources that the Lord has blessed you with. And no matter you have a little bit or a lot, we're all called to be good stewards of that. Their website is always landmarkgold.com, and their phone number is 844-879-8882. So one of the things we've talked about, and last year we were talking about what's going to happen this year, and your predictions have been spot on, David, which has been really helpful. And how do you do that? Because I know you're not playing with a Ouija board and you're not casting lots. So, where do you go for your information? I mean, it's easy for us to sit there and listen to you, but you're learning and studying all the time. So where do you go? How do you gather this kind of knowledge?
Well, there's about 4 or 5 websites that I go to regularly, maybe 6 or 7 now. I've added a couple more that I go to regularly. It's not a one source that like I get my information from, but I'm still chuckling about your joke there. So no, I don't do those things where you're insinuating, and we know that. But
just joking around.
It's hard to predict markets. It really is. But when you do something over 2 decades, and next August there'll be 25 years in the industry, you start to see some things happen. When this happens and that happens, then that means that the likelihood of this happening is going to be higher. But when this happens, so you start to markets are not exactly predictable, but there's some correlating factors. That's why I said, last year we're going to have a bull market in stocks, a bull market in gold. Because why? First of all, I started reading some articles of what would cause a stock market to spur on, there's one thing that I do see when there's a line of thread in the areas that I go to. See, some of the areas I don't go to regularly and use them as a news source. I do once in a while, but like CNBC and all the major news stations, they're usually behind the curve, unfortunately. Yeah. They've already – so a lot of the websites that people would say, oh, that's crazy, you get that news from here and there. A lot of that news they know before it's gone through major media. Like I talked about some things on your program, and people in the news media wasn't even talking about it yet. So that's some of it. Some of it's just a gut check on, what I think might happen, and through prayer. And, that may sound very spiritualizing it. I don't have too many of those moments where I just feel very strongly, here's what's going to happen. And it's like, I don't want to say the Lord has ever told me what to say on the air or what to invest in. I can't say that in all honesty. But there's just a certain gut feeling that in my spirit that tells me here's what I think is going to happen after studying, after reading, after running it through the experience meter.
And then where do you think is this pretty much the norm that we're looking at now, this kind of wild fluctuation up and down? They had, earlier in the year called it a correction because it was 10% down, but we've done that again. So is this just going to kind of be the norm? And do you think that by the end of 2018, the market will be higher than it was at the beginning of 2018?
Well, I'm now a major contributor on a regular basis for TD Ameritrade, and we were talking about this, and I said the market's going to go correct like this the first time I started, and Ben, the host, said, are you kidding me? That means in about 6 months the Dow's going to be at 10,000. That'd be crazy. And he was laughing, I was laughing. I don't think the Dow's going to 10,000 or anything like that. But I think the Dow is going to go, the indexes, they're going to go lower. They broke through some support levels today. We're in the environment of where it was overly bought. This goes against a lot of that's being said on CNBC. They have to tell you it's going to go up. Now is the time to buy. That's what they always have done historically. I'm not a doomsdayer. This is not a financial calamity. So I think we're going to be a few more of these months like this, but I think the market's going to simmer down. I don't think you're going to have more than a single-digit increase if we have an increase in the Dow, and I think, and the indexes, and I think we will. I think we're going to have a single to possibly a double-digit increase in precious metals as long as we can get what I call through the $1,360 level, where we keep bumping up to that. That's a technical resistance. So we should have more movement in gold this year than stocks. This is barring something very unusual, though.
Yeah, and I think that's sound advice. And again, nobody should just jump around and just go, hey, what you hear on the air from one person one time. You need to do some homework and make sure you're praying for wisdom and discernment and make sure you're getting good sources. And that's why we love having David on the show to help us out with this. Again, talking to David Fischer from Landmark Capital. Their website is landmarkgold.com, and their phone number is always 844-879-8882. We've talked a lot about what is called the petro yuan, which is essentially China bringing its own option in there to buy gold or to buy oil without having to use U.S. dollars. They just launched that last week. This is really I would call it a direct assault against kind of America's place in the world, or we're the world's reserve currency. You got to use dollars to buy oil, but not anymore. You can use petro yuan. They launched it last week. What's been happening since?
Well, it was in the launch, the volume was enormous, 4 times more than Brent crude in their volume, and there was 226,000 contracts, and that was Sunday a week ago. This last Thursday, Reuters reported that China took the next step, which was allow them to pay for import of the oil coming in. They would actually pay for that in their currency. So not only is it, you can trade it as a product in a option, which is what that was about, but now you can actually, countries can make payment, at least China is leading the charge. You can make payment in their own currency, and then sometime later on the second half of this year, China's launching a pilot program where actually other countries can join suit and pay for their oil in wands, tracking the dollar. Russia's already signed up, Angola signed up. So check out to what trade wars and what all the movement out of Washington is. Maybe this is the underlying force.
Yeah, and there's I'm looking at Al Jazeera of all places, and they have a title of an article that just came out on the 31st of March that says China's petro yuan, the end of the dollar hegemony. So you've got this pushback against the world reserve currency, the U.S. dollar, coming from our biggest trade competitor, I would call them, and quote-unquote partner, China. So this is very serious business, and we need to keep an eye on it as it continues to develop. So in terms of gold, and we're going to finish up with this, our conversation today, but what are kind of the drivers? We've alluded to this several times during the show, but what really drives the price of gold up or down?
Well, the obvious is supply versus demand, and we've reached what we call peak gold here this last year, where the demand is greater than the supply. The supply is now we're having a harder time getting the amount out of gold out of the earth. So that's one thing. The obvious is when our feds are selling dollars, it creates a dollar gluttony, and it creates incentive to go to safety. That's why you see treasuries are up, gold is up. And the obvious is, and we mentioned that, the debt of our country, there's a debt to correlate to gold and the debt ceiling. There's a chart out there, and just go to Google, put debt ceiling versus gold, and you'll see the debt, gold, and a debt ceiling, and we've gone tit for tat except for the 2012, but now we're undervalued. Gold is compared to our debt. So either the debt's got to come down or gold's got to make a big move to get up back where it was at for over 12 years.
Yeah, fascinating to keep an eye on this, and that's why it's important. That's why we kind of do these updates every week. We'll do a Money Monday update next week in the last segment of the show. And I know we mentioned this before, but these white papers, which are great educational resources for all of us, David, what's the main one that you have out right now?
Time is up. Which bubble will burst to trigger the coming deflate? And they can get that by calling my company. It talks about what's bursting, the different bubbles that are forming. Some of them we're seeing burst. It also talks about the petro yuan in detail there. So it's very educational.
And would you say that you're generally optimistic about the financial world in which we're all living in terms of investment and retirement in the future?
Oh, absolutely. I'm pro-capital, pro-United States. This is just a normal correction. The dollar's not going away. It's not going to crash or any of those things that they might hear from other metals companies. I don't believe any of that. I just believe diversification is a key role now. More importantly, in a proper, well-diversified portfolio will bring more security and more profit.
Yeah, and I think I've said it in the past that it's not my father's stock market anymore, and we live in a highly volatile, much more complex economy and investment world because of the world and how much it's shrunk over the years and how interconnected it all is. And that's why it's a great benefit to educate ourselves and make sure we're paying attention. And even though for some people are like, I don't know if I want to listen to this. Listen, this is important. Jesus talked about it, the New Testament, the Old Testament. It's all over the scriptures, what we do with money and possessions and its effect that it has on our heart and on our peace. And that's why we need to come at it, especially from a biblical perspective, with a brother that knows the Lord and has the Holy Spirit, and that's certainly our good friend David Fischer. Landmark Capital is always a great time to have you on, David. Thank you so much for your help. LandmarkGold.com or 844-879-8882. And as always, David, thanks for helping us out.
God bless. Thank you, Steve, for having me.
You're very welcome. And friends, we'll be back on tomorrow. Got a busy radio week, a lot going on, a lot to talk about. This is Steve Noble. It is Call to Action Radio. And God willing, I'll talk to you again real soon.